Welcome beyond the text by 6-7. We are diving today into what has to be one of the greatest cultural paradoxes in all of human history. I mean, just try to imagine this. A nation, a whole society, where the government's legitimacy rests on a single continuous line of rulers, and this line stretches back over 2.5 millennia, descending directly from the sun goddess. So loyalty, filial piety, these aren't just, good ideas, they're sacred truths. And yet,
Right.
this very same culture embraced a national spirit that is just deeply rooted in, well, philosophical atheism, in pragmatic secularism, and a really rigorous scientific materialism. We're exploring how the practical, action-oriented Japanese psyche took every great foreign idea, Confucianism, Laoism, Buddhist metaphysics, and basically stripped it clean of any personal god or complex theology. And from that, they forged this unconquerable ethical machine that we know as Bushido. That's our mission today, to understand the inner life of Japan, not through its sources of religious belief, but through its sources of action, its sources of practical loyalty.
It's an absolutely essential journey to take if you want to understand Japan. And we are guiding you through it using a really remarkable lens. It's the classic work, The Japanese Spirit, by Yoshisaburo Okakura. It was originally a series of lectures he gave in London back in 1905. And the challenge, and this is really the central difficulty for, let's say, the Western mind trying to approach this, you have to grant yourself freedom from your conventional philosophy of life. You really do. You have to temporarily suspend this idea that morality or political stability must derive from a personal theological agent.
That a god is necessary for a moral code.
Precisely. What Japan achieved was this masterful art of selective borrowing. They took the profound metaphysics of India, the rigid ethics of China, and they meticulously fused them together, all of it in what Okakura calls the furnace of Shintoism, to serve the existing national cult. The goal wasn't abstract salvation in some heaven. No, the goal was operational strength, right here on Earth.
Okay, so let's unpack that furnace first. The foundational native element,
Right.
Shinto. It literally means the path of the gods. And it is so fascinating that for a society that is so globally modern and, as we're going to see, so deeply secular among its educated classes, the foundation is this ancient ancestor worship, specifically centered on the divine origin of the imperial line. This is the sacred hinge of the nation, a lineage going all the way back to the first emperor Jimmu. At the time Okakura was writing, that stretched back, 2,565 years? It's almost incomprehensible. But the way they see the divine, and especially the deceased, this is where the conventional model just completely breaks down, because the dead, they never really leave.
That is the critical divergence right there. And it's all encapsulated in this unique Shinto concept of the living dead. In Shinto, the departed, it doesn't matter if it's your recent grandfather or an ancient emperor, they are emphatically not considered lost. They're not passed away. They're not in some distant heaven or hell. They're simply invisible. The belief is that they are leading their ethereal life in the same world and in much the same state that they were used to while on Earth. They're just one step removed from our perception.
So it's continuation, almost like a parallel track running alongside our own reality, which would make devotion and reverence a tangible, ongoing interaction. It's not just an abstract memory or, a prayer sent off to some far-off place that gives the whole concept of ancestry this immense, immediate power.
Exactly. And you see this tangibility play out in these simple but really profound daily rituals. These rituals of endearment, they underline that sense of continuous presence. Okakura gives this perfect example. An absent family member, let's say it's a father leaving on a journey, or even more pointedly, a soldier going to war. The raised part of his room, the most sacred space in the home, is made sacred to his memory while he's away. The family gathers there
Yeah.
every day, expressing devotion, love, offering gifts, food, maintaining his presence.
And this is where the power of that spiritual foundation gets crystal clear. If that soldier dies on the battlefield, the family's ritualistic attitude, it doesn't really change. The person who's temporarily departed just becomes permanently departed, but he is not lost. So the daily offerings, the salutations, that feeling of devotion continues in exactly the same way it did when he was just, say, away on a business trip.
Yes. And this ingrained continuity means that even the modern Japanese mind, which is steeped in science and agnosticism, often keeps one corner of their heart totally sacred to this inherited feeling. You might be able to convince an educated European of the non-existence of a personal God, but you would have a much, much harder time shaking this inherited practical feeling in the Japanese heart.
And this foundation also shapes their whole understanding of morality and sin. And it's highly pragmatic. Shinto puts this huge emphasis on lustration, on meticulous cleanliness.
Right, the purification rituals, the
Yeah.
constant washing of the body, or that symbolic sprinkling of salt after a funeral to cleanse the home of death's impurity.
Hmm.
It all points to this fundamental idea that impurity, whether it's mental, like a deceitful thought, or corporal, like actual physical filth, that is the great evil. That is sin.
So sin isn't an offense against a divine commandment. It's more like a taint, a pollution. It's about restoring a kind of physical and spiritual equilibrium. And this obsession with purity, it's woven so deeply into the national character. It goes right back to the founding myths.
To the god Izanagi washing himself after his journey to the polluted Hades. And that very act of purification, of washing, resulted in the birth of the sun goddess Amaterasu herself. So purity equals divinity.
Okay, so if we connect this foundational belief, this unique ancestor cult to the political sphere, you immediately see why the Japanese nation has been so historically stable. The divine origin of the emperor linked directly to the sun goddess through this unbroken chain of living dead ancestors. It invested the throne with both temporal and spiritual power at the same time.
Creating an unbreakable sacred loyalty that you just don't see anywhere else. And this is the great geopolitical gap that separates Japan from its neighbors, especially from China.
Let's focus on that contrast with China for a second, because it really clarifies the Japanese structure. In China, the reigning idea was the divine presider, Shangti, or the august heaven, Huangtem.
And heaven selects a ruler only temporarily. This idea of the heavenly mission, or Tianming, means the ruler's mandate is totally conditional. It depends on his virtue, his success.
So when things go wrong, corruption, famine, massive unrest, that's a signal. The mission is renovated, quemming. It's transferred through bloodshed and revolution.
Yes, Chinese fatalism inherently justifies dynastic change. It establishes this pattern of cyclic collapse and rebirth.
But in Japan, that idea of quemming is, well, it's almost unknown in its grave aspects. The idea that the nation's structure depends on the current emperor's moral success is it's irrelevant.
Because his legitimacy isn't based on virtue or conquest, it's based solely on bloodline, on being the descendant of the sun goddess. That structure is immutable. Even the most powerful military dictators, the shoguns, who held all the real political and military power for centuries, they recognized the danger of tampering with that sacred hinge on which the nation's entire religious and moral life turns.
It's just astonishing. For hundreds of years, the emperors were often politically powerless, sometimes reduced to ceremonial poverty. And yet the shoguns never dared to usurp the spiritual throne. No shogun ever tried to formally become emperor, and this reverence was only really tested once in history. And it's a powerful illustration of Shinto's inviolability.
That happened in the 8th century. It involved a Buddhist monk named Dokyo. He was the favorite confidant of the ruling Empress Kukin, and encouraged by her affection and maybe his own ambition, he openly planned to ascend the throne himself. This was a true existential crisis.
And this is where the native cult just acted as the ultimate defensive mechanism.
Right. The threat was only averted by the resolute patriotism of a Shinto priest, Wake no Kiyomaru. He was sent to the great shrine of Usa to consult the oracle of the god Hachiman about Dokyo's claim.
And he comes back, and in this act of defiance that Okakura compares to Martin Luther facing the Diet, he fearlessly declares the divine will. Japan is to know no emperor except in the person of the divine descendants of the sun goddess.
Kiyomaru was, of course, exiled, almost executed for it. But his declaration resonated. Dokyo fell from power right after the empress died. The very fact that this divine legitimacy survived the complete political and military subservience of the emperor for 700 years. It just demonstrates that Shinto was never merely a political tool. It was, and it remains, the sacred central battery of the national psyche, providing that unconditional loyalty and continuity.
Which makes the subsequent absorption of foreign philosophy so much more interesting. The foundation is set. Unbreakable loyalty to this eternal divine line. But how do you run a bureaucracy, manage taxes, educate warriors, define social duty day to day? Shinto is great on legitimacy and purity, but it doesn't give you the how-to manual for loyalty and practical action. And that's where the giants from the continent came in, Confucianism and Taoism.
Indeed. We pivot now to the pragmatic core that Japan adopted wholesale from China, Confucianism. It provided the entire structure for morality. What made Confucius, or Confucius, so appealing to the Japanese mind was his determined refusal to engage in religious or metaphysical ideas. His whole focus was on practical conduct, the hierarchy of relationships, the duties of everyday life. He was profoundly utilitarian.
Right, his famous avoidance of the spiritual dimension. When one of his disciples asked him specifically about death and the afterlife, his classic reply defined his whole approach. How can we know anything of an afterlife when we are so ignorant even of the living?
And his definition of wisdom reflected this exact pragmatism. He said, to give oneself to the duties due to men, and while respecting spiritual things, to keep aloof from them. It's an instruction manual for successful social operation. Morality as management science, devoid of complex theology, which perfectly suited the Japanese need for a practical code of action.
And the ethical hierarchy he built is based entirely on the human social structure. The centrality of filial piety, the Shao King, is the source of all good actions.
And this family duty is then seamlessly linked outward to the duty you owe the sovereign. It's captured in the maxim, dutiful subjects are to be found in the persons of filial sons.
So it's a beautiful complementary relationship with Shinto. Shinto gives you the divine source and the unconditional object of loyalty, the emperor. And then Confucianism comes in and provides the detailed moral mechanism for executing that loyalty.
Exactly. It's an imported system designed to enforce the native political cult without ever touching the spiritual details.
But Confucianism didn't stay purely pragmatic, did it? We should acknowledge the later, more philosophical developments, specifically the school of Chusi, or Neo-Confucianism, which the Tokugawa shogunate adopted as its official philosophy.
Yes. Chusi, who lived around 1130–1200, tried to give Confucianism a genuine cosmological grounding, though it was heavily indebted to philosophical Buddhism and Laoism. This system sought to explain the entire universe through infinity, or taiki, and this consisted of two elements, Li and Qi.
Okay, hold on. Let's break those two terms down because they're pretty central to understanding this self-contained secular morality. So Li is what? The ideal code, the blueprint.
You can think of it that way. Li is the force element, the heavenly virtue. It's the perfect software, the ethical source code for the universe.
And Qi, then, is the hardware.
A great analogy. Qi is the matter element. It's the physical medium, the body, the disposition. Now, according to Chu Si, every human receives the Limo. That is our perfect, real human nature, or Sing.
But the quality of the hardware, the Qi, varies. So if the Qi is muddy or tainted, it covers up that perfect limb.
Right. And evil acts are not the result of sin against a personal God. They're just the result of this tainted Qi covering up the original perfect nature.
It's a fascinating, sophisticated, and entirely secular explanation of morality.
And that's why the Tokugawa shogunate chose it?
Yes. They needed a stabilizing ideology for their bureaucracy that was independent of the Buddhist temples and Shinto shrines. And Neo-Confucianism provided a rigorous, rationalistic, self-contained system of virtue. Morality became a natural, cosmic law you could study and apply.
Now let's contrast that systematic approach with Laoism. Lao Tse was basically the philosophical opposite of Confucius.
Completely. Where Confucius focused on social structure and duty, Lao Tse advocated a return to the natural order, the Tao, casting off human artifice, getting rid of elaborate social rules. His doctrine was all about simplicity, non-assertion, and profound humility.
His core idea about virtue is famously paradoxical.
It is, he wrote, superior virtue is non-virtue. Therefore, it has virtue. Inferior virtue never loses sight of virtue. Therefore, it has no virtue. Okay, I need some clarification here. You're telling me that a culture built on absolute loyalty and warrior prowess, a culture that created Bushido, found guidance in a doctrine that champions non-assertion and non-virtue. That feels like a major cognitive dissonance. How did the practical Japanese mind even process that?
They processed it by extracting the practical psychological kernel. Lao Tse's lesson wasn't about being passive. It was about achieving total efficacy through humility. The true man puts his person behind, and his person comes to the front. In martial terms, this translates to conserving energy, avoiding conflict, and finding ultimate strength in effortless flow, a concept that is perfectly applicable to a disciplined warrior.
So they translated philosophical humility into tactical superiority. They took the idea of emptying the self and applied it to mental discipline. Another example of them taking foreign metaphysics and making it immediately actionable.
Absolutely. However, the path of Laoism also shows how easily abstract philosophy can degrade when the masses misinterpret it. While the teachings of Lao Tse and his successor Chuangzi were profound, popular Taoism in China degraded these concepts radically.
How so?
The metaphorical idea of the deathlessness of a true man, which meant spiritual transcendence, was misinterpreted matter-of-factly. They took it to mean the pursuit of actual physical immortality.
So people started believing they could literally live forever through magic.
Yes, it led directly to occult arts, herbalism, alchemy, geomancy. this frantic search for the elixir of life. And what's fascinating is that the Japanese mind, with its rigorous practicality, was generally immune to this. They favored the philosophical core, but largely ignored the superstitious quest for immortality part.
That tendency to extract the useful kernel and leave the supernatural husk behind is so crucial. They always prioritized function over fantasy. Which brings us to the biggest spiritual challenge of all and the most compelling piece of evidence for Japan's philosophical atheism: Buddhism.
Yes. When Buddhism, with its vast Indian metaphysical depth, arrived, the Japanese had to process a system that was, in its truest philosophical form, inherently atheistic. This is a point that is so often missed when you look at the temples and the statues.
Okay, let's nail this down. How can Buddhism, a worldwide religion, be described as atheistic?
Because philosophical Buddhism, the original form advocated by Shakyamuni himself, believes in no god or gods whatever as a personal motive power. The universe doesn't operate on divine will. It operates on two eternal, impersonal elements: matter, or its essence, and karma.
And karma isn't divine retribution, it's just the law of cause and effect.
Exactly. It's an impersonal law, like gravity, written into the fabric of matter itself. Therefore, the universe is inherently amoral, ruled by fatal necessity, and existence itself is an illusion of impermanency. An attachment to this dreamy world leads to inescapable misery.
So salvation isn't achieved through devotion to a God who grants grace, it's achieved through rigorous mental work.
The path is the complete negation of egoism, destroying the illusion of self and unconditional absorption into that fundamental impersonal law of the universe, nirvana.
Shakyamuni was just a guide then, not a savior.
Just a teacher, showing the method for self-liberation. It's intellectually profound, but also profoundly cold and impersonal.
And this is where the tension arises, right? Shinto is all about eternal continuity. The living dead remain present. But philosophical Buddhism preaches absolute impermanence. Existence is suffering and must be negated. How do those two systems even coexist?
They coexist because the Japanese adopted the methodology while rejecting the ultimate goal. The practical Japanese mind needed a tool for action, not a blueprint for cosmological cessation. They focus on the practice of self-negation and self-discipline, which is what led them to the most speculative branch of Buddhism, Zen.
How did Zen, which is all about abstract contemplation, take root in such an action-oriented nation? It seems completely counterintuitive for warriors to sit in silent meditation.
The timing is critical. Zen arrived and became popular during the rough, violent Middle Ages. It coincided with the rise of the samurai warrior caste and the intense threat of Kublai Khan's invasion in 1281. These warriors needed a psychological tool that could create absolute mental stability in the middle of chaos.
And their goal wasn't the cold, existential cessation of nirvana?
No, not at all. Their goal was stoic indifference. They needed the ability to face any hardship, any battle, injury, or death with something akin to indifference. And that demands perfect, unshakable self-control, undisturbable peace of mind. Zen provided the most direct, rigorous methodology for achieving that exact state.
So Zen provided the psychological armor. It fostered self-control, enabling a person not to betray their inner feelings, not to flinch.
And what's more, because Zen focused on direct, intuitive, heart-to-heart understanding, it neglected book learning.
Which suited the illiterate warrior class perfectly. They valued immediate practical application over scholarly debate.
Exactly. The Zen system was practical, portable, and immediately applicable to violence and death. It taught the warrior how to sever attachment to the world in order to be more lethal within the world. It was self-negation, weaponized.
And its influence went far beyond the battlefield. It dictated the aesthetics of the nation, encouraging a serene dislike of loudness of form and color, the famous simplicity in art and architecture.
Yes, Okakura suggests that the entire set of phenomena peculiar to Japan, from their quiet reserve to harakiri, will remain a sealed book unless you understand Zen's psychological discipline. It's the practical key to the Japanese inner life.
This incredible synthesis native divine legitimacy and imported atheistic ethics leads us right to the modern state of mind. We've established the foundations. So what does the average educated Japanese person believe, at least in the early 20th century context of this source?
Okakura is remarkably clear on this, and it might be surprising to a Western audience. If you were to ask an average educated Japanese person at that time if they believe in a personal God in the Christian sense, or Buddha as a creator, or Shinto deities as active agencies, you would get an answer in the negative in 99 cases out of 100.
99 out of 100,
Right.
that's a staggering degree of secularism,
Right.
of philosophical atheism. And it's coexisting seamlessly with a national government centered on an eternal divine monarchy.
And this prevailing mindset is not accidental. It is the culmination of intentional policy and intellectual tradition. Okakura gives 3 explicit reasons for this widespread non-belief among the intellectual class.
The first one is rooted in deliberate educational policy, right, from the Meiji Restoration.
Yes, for the 35 years leading up to the book's publication, school education was entirely free from denominational teaching. This was intentional,
Ethics were taught universally through secular maxims, mostly from the Chinese classics.
which meant the entire moral basis of the new Japanese citizen was established as independent of any sectarian belief.
Okay, what's the second reason?
The overwhelming acceptance of modern scientific law, the knowledge of natural science, imported so rapidly from the West, made it impossible for the rational self to anchor on anything other than impersonal law.
That's a powerful echo of the Buddhist philosophical tradition.
A perfect echo. The Japanese mind, having previously relied on the impersonal law of karma, found an easy replacement in the impersonal laws of physics, biology, and chemistry. They just swapped ancient metaphysics for modern physics, but kept the core atheistic structure.
And the third reason is moral independence. The conviction that you can be upright and brave without basing your morals on a specific religion.
Exactly. For the educated class, Confucianism and the warrior code, Bushido, were demonstrably sufficient. The result is that the average educated mind settles comfortably into modern scientific agnosticism, with a strong tendency towards materialistic monism, which is the belief that only matter and impersonal force exist as the ultimate reality. No need for any psychic agencies or personal gods.
So where does that leave traditional religion, especially the more popular forms of Buddhism?
It leaves it in a peculiar, highly specialized, and somewhat marginal role. Religion is seen as something only for the aged and the weak. And critically, it's maintained primarily for the execution of religious rites, specifically funerals. The process of arranging a funeral is viewed by the educated layman as being as much outside his spiritual realm as medicine or law. It's a specialized service, carried out by professionals, not a source of moral grounding.
The irony is just so rich. A highly spiritual foundational cult that guarantees national stability, combined with a highly secular, impersonal, imported ethical code that guarantees personal discipline. Which brings us to the ultimate synthesis. Bushido, the applied morality.
Yes, Bushido, the path of the samurai, the unwritten code of morality for the warrior caste. It's the perfect blend. Confucian loyalty provides the framework, Zen self-control provides the psychological methodology, and native Shinto purity provides the reverence for the name and the lineage.
And the cornerstone of this code was an indomitable sense of honor.
Paramount. It reached a pathological extreme that defined their entire existence. The samurai preferred instant suicide to even the slightest suspicion of disgrace.
And this brings us to the most dramatic and often misunderstood element of Bushido, harakiri, or seppuku.
Its origin is a direct philosophical outcome of this love of an unstained, pure name. You have to understand the literal significance of the act. The word hara means abdomen, but it was also metaphorically considered the supposed organ for one's ideas and intentions, the seat of the spirit.
So it's not just an act of cutting yourself open to die, it's a literal physical manifestation of spiritual honesty.
Precisely. By cutting open his hara, a man whose motives had been suspected demonstrated in the most graphic, final, and undeniable way possible that his inside was free from any trace of ideas not worthy of a samurai. It was the ultimate assertion of moral purity.
That puts the ritual into a whole new context. It connects the Shinto concern with purity cleansing the taint with the Zen need for perfect self-control.
The perfect, terrifying synthesis of all 3 major influences. And this Zen-based self-control extended into every area of life, particularly aesthetics and social refinement. You see it so clearly in the chinoe, the tea ceremony.
How was the tea ceremony used as a tool for training warriors? It seems so delicate, so quiet, so far removed from the battlefield.
It was a system of cultivating good manners, yes, but fundamentally it was about training graceful carriage and inner presence of mind. That stoic serenity Zen demanded. Imagine a great warrior, maybe returning bloodstained from battle, stepping into the small, simple tea house.
They'd be forced to appreciate serenity, to dislike ostentation.
Every single movement is formalized. How to open the door, how to enter through the deliberately low entrance that forces humility, how to stir the tea, how to sip it. These movements are meant to train the mind in perfect self-control and absolute quietude.
And this philosophy of refined simplicity, driven by Zen taste, rules home decoration as well.
Yes, the Japanese ideal is one of studied simplicity, a serene dislike of loudness of form and color. Subdued colors, a studied avoidance of symmetry, and a crucial curation of objects.
The goal is to ensure every object of art has a fair opportunity for appreciation.
The principle is that exposition is, after all, a very poor means of showing. They hide unnecessary items, rotate displays to maximize the impact of the essential.
And this quest for perfected, condensed expression extends to other small arts. The 17-syllable poetry, hokku, and the cultivation of bonsai, the dwarf trees.
The Japanese aesthetic is defined by symbolic meaning and delicacy of line, reflecting the brevity and beauty of existence. And that aesthetic sensibility, combining beauty and brevity, leads us to the final beautiful symbol of the Japanese spirit, the cherry blossom, the sakura.
Which is cultivated not for its fruit, but purely for its fleeting, gorgeous flowers.
Right, and it embodies a very specific philosophical ideal. The cherry blossom symbolizes sunny gaiety and a readiness to scatter their heart-shaped petals with a samurai's indifference to death. It's the perfect image of beauty married to absolute impermanence. The ideal is to live a complete, dazzling life, followed by a sudden, unconditional end. No clinging, no fear, no regret.
Tori Norina's famous ode summarizes this perfectly. He wrote, "Should anyone ask me what the spirit of Japan is like, I would point to the blossoms of the wild cherry tree bathing in the beams of the morning sun."
It encapsulates the sunniness and continuity of the Shinto character, fused with the Zen disciplined acceptance of action and death. So this deep dive has really revealed that the Japanese spirit is this powerful, dynamic synthesis. The native foundation of ancestral worship provides the political and social legitimacy, the sacred, unconditional tie that binds the nation to the emperor. But the ethical and existential backbone is forged from imported, rigorous, and often atheistic philosophical frameworks.
All of it filtered through a national character that prioritizes practicality and decisive action. And what's so fascinating here, as we conclude, is the final insight Okakura offers on Japan's perceived want of originality. It's true, they borrowed from civilizations like China and India.
But the true originality isn't in the ideas themselves. It's in how they were applied and perfected. They didn't just passively receive these doctrines. They worked them up into dynamic, practical reality-shaping forces. They turned philosophical ideals into concrete, applied realities like Bushido or the serenity of the tea ceremony. The development of those intricate small arts, the hokku, bonsai, cha-no-i, demonstrates profound, unique originality.
So what does this entire synthesis, the sun goddess lineage, combined with materialistic monism mean for you, the listener? If a society can successfully base its highest ethical code, Bushido, on pragmatic Chinese morality and the self-control derived from an atheistic Indian philosophy like Zen Buddhism, while still unconditionally venerating an eternal divine lineage, does the effective application of morality truly require the framework of a personal sectarian god? What does the undeniable historical and modern success of the Japanese spirit tell us about the future of purely secular ethics globally? That's something to think about long after this deep dive ends. Until next time.